Okie dokie. Everyone got your ballot? Are you serious right now?
If you hear voices, it's my mom and my brother watching a paleontology lecture. So this week we're going to talk about voting because it's 2020 election coming up. I actually did not know about the process fully until I switched my major from neuroscience to pre-law. There's different levels of the US government, so there's federal, state, and local. Each state and local election is a little bit different depending where you live, but I will be primarily focusing on federal government and kind of somewhat touching on state and local. Let's start with the actual process of voting. In November, we all cast our ballots. This popular vote tells our respective states which party the Electoral College should go for, and the electors vote on who should be president. Each party within the state has their own process to choose their electors. In total, there are 538 possible electoral votes that any of the presidential candidates can obtain. But in order to lock in the presidency, the candidate must secure 270. Each state has a particular number of electoral votes determined by their senators plus representatives. States' number of reps is reliant on population, and at a minimum, states are promised 1 representative and 2 senators. According to Washington Post, quote, "The Electoral College is supposed to guarantee that populous states can't dominate an election, but it also sets up a disparity in representation. While California has 1 electoral vote per 712,000 people, Wyoming, the least populous state in the country, has 1 electoral vote per 195,000 people. When our government was initially forming, this was a compromise because one particular party wanted a popular vote of all the people to decide on the president, and then another party wanted it to be strictly within the Senate. There are a lot of arguments about abolishing the Electoral College system. It's a very rare occurrence. The candidate who wins the popular vote is not who the delegates choose, as we saw in 2016. So there are a lot of arguments about abolishing the Electoral College system, but there's also a lot of arguments about keeping it. The argument about abolishing the Electoral College is very much focused on the entirety of the American population should be able to choose their president. However, there are arguments about keeping the Electoral College was built to protect smaller states who have smaller populations in order to make sure that they're equally represented in the presidential election. Sometimes systems are archaic and need to be updated or revamped, and sometimes they don't age well. But other times there are systems to prevail and to protect particular states. So another question that comes up that I've actually had a lot of conversations with both friends, family, and just strangers who I run into at coffee shops is how to educate ourselves on our candidates on both federal, state, and local elections. So there is an option on your ballot to vote straight party, which is you just mark that one box for Republican or Democrat, and it fills out your ballot automatically. But that means that you're not educating yourself on particular aspects of a candidate, what they have done, their voting record, if they have already previously been in office, and what they represent and what they plan to do. And those are all very important decisions that we need to educate ourselves on before we fill in those boxes. These are the people who determine laws that affect ourselves and our communities. So it is a very important decision that should not be checked once and then day done. For presidential elections, it is pretty easy to research those candidates because they're highly publicized. People have been doing research on their backgrounds, and they usually have a history of voting and some type of public service. Just make sure that your sources are fact-checked. It's fine to see someone else's point of view, but make sure that you're educating yourself and looking up those facts that they state. So if someone were to tweet out, hey, Harris's prosecution record is very problematic, let me go research that and not just take their claim as fact. For state elections, they're also on a more public scale unless they're a newcomer to the field. And they should have some type of history that you're able to look at and research. And if they don't, go to their website and make sure to read their platform in depth. For local elections, it's a little bit harder, but usually you can find local news sources who have been covering these candidates for a while. And you can also have conversations with people who have lived in the community for a long time and make sure to have those conversations with the people in your community about how these particular candidates and the platforms that they back impact them, not just yourself. For judges, it's a little bit harder to find that information because they're not necessarily running, so they don't necessarily have a platform or things that they back. So it's a little bit harder, but you can look up their background and their decisions and the rulings that they've made and come to your conclusions by yourself. So my family and I voted absentee, so we all sat down together and filled out our ballots and did research together. So it's really a fun process if you have someone in the same vicinity, or even not, you can have a Zoom call with some of your best friends and talk about it. It is something that you need to set off some time and make sure that you are educating yourself about these candidates and their platforms, because it does make a massive impact on not only your life but your community as well. So let's talk about voter suppression. So according to Christian Clark, the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, voter suppression are tactics like aggressive voter ID laws, confusing and excessive registration processes, relocating poll locations, policing poll locations, closing poll sites, and all of these methods primarily affect people of color and their communities. Where your polling location is located is determined on where you live, which, to take a couple steps back and quite a while back, we're going to talk about a thing called redlining. So redlining is a process that banks used to outline neighborhoods and areas that were deemed more likely to default on their mortgages. And these communities and neighborhoods were primarily black and brown, so banks denied mortgages and loans to these families. The banks would literally take out a map, a red marker, and they would literally draw red lines surrounding these neighborhoods and deem them unlikely. If you want to see your locations, redline districts, and how you can still see it today, just look at your city's archives and you can kind of see it then. So laws try to prevent homelanding discrimination, but it still prevails in today's society, and it also morphs into different techniques. For instance, a study found that black and brown homes sell and inspect for far less than a white family's. And the last thing that we all should be keeping in mind is that in order to heal our country, that's a lot of the rhetoric surrounding this election, is healing our country and healing the divides that exist. In order to heal that, we have to look back at the history and look back at the wrongs that we have done as Americans and listen to the people we have harmed and let them lead. They know what is best for them. So don't forget to go out and vote. Make sure to register. Voting deadlines in pretty much every single state is coming up, so make sure to register to vote if you have not already. It can be kind of confusing. Ask someone who has already done it before, ask your friends. If everyone in your friend group is already registered, make sure that everyone is going out and casting their votes. Because even though our system is pretty screwed up, and even if you do not agree with any of the candidates running right now, sometimes we have to work with the system and while working to abolish/reform the same system that we are casting our votes for. So make sure to go out and vote. I have a bunch of links to register to vote. Check your registration down below. Make sure that your friends, your family are going out to vote and casting educated ballots. Have a wine night, talk about the candidates running on federal, state, and local. So thank you again for joining me for this chat. And it's midnight. I still gotta shower. I'm really tired. Tomorrow's Monday. So I gotta speed edit this video. So I'm just gonna go.